Very many, in fact, 69 recommendations, so it's pretty far-reaching. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. I suppose one has to understand that what the report points to and what we've seen evidence of in a number of places is mostly mainstream traditional media in deep trouble, financial trouble, ethical trouble, in trouble with journalistic practice, under enormous pressure, particularly on the business model and financial side. But there's been some extraordinary journalism, mostly from the new group of independent, standalone, non-profit, philanthropically funded specialist units, of which a few have popped up in recent years, and who, because they're well-funded from private and foundational sources, have been able to do some really important and really world-class work. So it's a picture of an industry as a whole in deep trouble, but pockets being sustained and doing good work largely because of the support of generous foundations and individuals.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about the fact that the inquiry was set up in response to what happened at the Sunday Times, the Sunday Times newspaper having to retract those series of stories that fed into the state capture narrative, the narrative of this rogue unit at the South African Revenue Service as well. This notion of journalists being used for political means in an industry, as you say, that already faces so many constraints. Everyone is trying to come out with the next story. Everyone is trying to be the first to break a story. The difficulty of balancing that,
Yes, this is what I dealt with in some depth in my book, So for the Record, which came out last year. The report was commissioned because we were all shocked when the Sunday Times, which is our biggest newspaper and which had such a reputation for investigative journalism, it had to apologize for a number of stories that they not just carried, but stuck with and over a year or two, and continued to report even when it became clear that they were on the wrong track. One of the things that emerges in my book and has been reinforced by what's emerged at the Zondo Commission this week is that the State Security Agency played a crucial role, as well as police crime intelligence, by the way, in working systematically and putting resources and people into trying to mislead journalists and newspapers. And the question I ask arising from that is, why did the Sunday Times fall for it? And the reasons I give and the Satchwell report reinforces that under enormous financial pressure, the Sunday Times was cutting corners. It was desperate for big front page splashes and scoops, and that encouraged them to cut corners, and they therefore fell into a trap of buying into stories that were being fed to them.
Yeah.
It really does, you're quite right, that and a number of other recent events have really highlighted the danger of partisan media that takes sides in political battles and squabbles, not just takes sides with political parties, but within factions within parties. And we've seen that pollute our political journalism very seriously. So the Satchwell report looks at the kinds of measures the industry needs to take to counter those kinds of things.
We are an industry that relies on self-regulation, aren't we? I mean, for the most part. And have you noted that, where the problems have arisen, if we just think about the testimony coming out of the state capture inquiry this week around the State Security Agency and its funding of the African News Agency, have you noticed that it's when that self-regulation fails, when organizations choose to not be a part of the mechanisms that do allow for self-regulation, that's where things start to fall apart?
Certainly that's one element. You're quite right that we've built up a strong self-regulatory system in this country because we don't want politicians and the state interfering in our right to publish and our right to speak out and our freedom of speech and our freedom of the media. So we've built up a strong self-regulatory system. I mean, interestingly, in the case of the Sunday Times story, that system was critical in challenging the Sunday Times and getting them to back down from the story. It took a little long, but that was for various technical reasons. But the problem that Satchwell highlights, and it's become very clear, is that we have what have been labeled rogue media institutions that won't join the self-regulatory system and therefore are not accountable to the industry, to their peers, to the public. And that's terribly worrying, and we see a proliferation of disinformation coming from those who have gone rogue, so to speak. The Satchwell report makes an interesting suggestion that the industry also ask individual journalists, not just media houses and institutions, to sign up to the code of conduct and the self-regulatory press council and ombudsman system. And I think that's a very interesting idea, which means that even if a newspaper, for example, goes rogue, its staff members can still say, look, we want to be professional, we want to be part of the profession, we don't want to be rogue, we'll sign up as individuals. And I think that's a very interesting suggestion to strengthen the system.
I mean, it's very interesting to look at the findings of the Satchwell report, which also talks about the incredibly tough conditions that journalists themselves do work under. It talks about the juniorization of the newsroom, shareholders who are cutting costs. We're not training our journalists because we don't have the money to do so. How do we continue with the level of investigation, of investigative journalism that our democracy has come to rely on when we do face this mirage of challenges?
We do need to find new ways to fund the journalism and the investigative journalism that is so important to our democracy.
All right, that's unfortunate. We seem to have lost our connection with Professor Anton Harber.